In the year 2214, the Deep Space Relay Station Halcyon 9 drifted alone at the edge of the Kuiper expanse, its hull dark except for a single amber light blinking in the observation ring. It had been 312 days since the last transmission from Earth. Not silence by accident, silence by design. The war had gone cold, then colder, and then it had simply stopped being a war at all, because there was no longer anyone left to argue with. Aboard the station, a woman named Mira Solen kept the lights on. She was not the station's commander. She had never held that rank. She was technically a maintenance technician third class, contract renewed twice, never promoted, never complained. When the evacuation order came, when the last shuttle burned its engines toward the inner system and did not look back, Mira had been below decks, replacing a coolant valve that nobody else considered important enough to fix. By the time she climbed back up through the access shaft, the shuttle bay was empty and the silence had already begun. She told herself in the beginning that another ship would come. Supply runs were irregular but not impossible. She rationed the algae tanks. She slept in 4-hour cycles to conserve heat. She talked to the station's core intelligence, a modest and aging system named ORIN, because talking to something was better than talking to nothing. Any change in the beacon status? She asked for the 600th time on the morning the story truly begins. No change, ORIN said in the same even voice it always used. The relay is still broadcasting our position. No response has been logged in 11 months. Broadcasting anyway. I always do. Mira drank her ration of recycled water and looked out through the reinforced viewport at the slow wheel of stars. She had stopped expecting an answer months ago. Hope, she had learned, was a kind of weight, and a person alone in the dark could only carry so much of it before it became easier to set down. That was the morning the signal came. It was faint, so faint that ORIN nearly filtered it out as background noise, the kind of static cosmic radiation left scattered across every frequency. But it repeated. 3 pulses, a pause, 3 pulses again, in a rhythm too clean, too deliberate to be born of any star. Mira sat upright in her cot when ORIN's voice changed pitch just slightly in the way it did when something had actually happened. Mira, I'm detecting a structured transmission. Point of origin outside the system, it isn't Earth. She was in the comms chair before she'd finished pulling on her boots. Translate it. Can't, not yet, but it's not natural. Nothing natural repeats like this. For 6 days, Mira did nothing but listen. She mapped the pulses, ran them against every linguistic model the station's ancient databank still held, fed them into ORIN's slow, patient mind. On the 7th day, a pattern broke loose from the noise, not words, not exactly, but something like a shape. A greeting maybe, or a question, or a warning. The station's tiny crew of one could not be sure, and there was no one left back home to ask. If I answer, Mira said quietly, staring at the pulsing readout, there's no version of this where I get to take it back. That's true, ORIN said. There rarely is with first contact. You're supposed to talk me out of reckless decisions. That's in your operating parameters somewhere. You are the last human being within 4 light years, Mira. I have run this scenario 11,000 times. In most of them, staying silent changes nothing except how alone you feel while it happens. She almost laughed. Came out instead as something closer to a breath. She thought of Earth, not the Earth of speeches and treaties and burning cities that the news feeds had shown before they went dark, but the Earth of small things. Rain on a window, her mother's hands, a song she couldn't fully remember the words to anymore. She thought about what it would mean to be the first voice her species sent outward, not as a threat, but as a question. She opened the channel. This is Halcyon 9, she said, her voice steadier than she expected. Relay station, formerly of the Sol Compact. I don't know if you can understand this. I don't know if anyone is listening at all anymore on either side of this signal. But I'm here. My name is Mira Solen. I am, as far as I know, the only living person for a very long way in any direction. If you're out there, I'd like to not be alone. Pulses stopped. For 11 hours there was nothing. Mira did not sleep. She sat in the chair with her hands folded, watching the readout hold its silence, and she let herself feel fully, for the first time in almost a year, how frightened she was, not of dying, which she had made a strange kind of peace with months ago, but of having reached out and having it mean nothing at all. Then the pulses returned. Different this time. Slower. And beneath them, faint but unmistakable, something new. A second layer of signal, structured the way a voice is structured, rising and falling like breath. Orion's processors worked through the night. By morning, fragments began to resolve, not full sentences but pieces translated the way a dream is translated when you wake, imperfectly and with meaning bleeding in around the "heard you a long time ago," the fragments said. We did not answer because we did not know if your kind still wanted to be heard. Mira read the words on the screen 3 times before she trusted her eyes. Ask them who they are, she said. The answer took another day to arrive. The distance was enormous and every exchange cost hours crossing the dark. When it came, it was simple almost. Are what is left of a people who also went quiet. You have been listening ever since, in case someone else's silence ever broke. Mira sat with that for a long time. Somewhere in the wreckage of the war, in the burned files and abandoned colonies and the great retreat of everyone she had ever known, humanity had gone silent too, not destroyed as far as she knew, but scattered, withdrawn, frightened into stillness. She had assumed, without ever quite deciding to assume it, that the silence meant the end. Now she understood it might only have meant a pause. A held breath? A species deciding, somewhere far from her, whether it still had a voice worth using. She was not the last human being. She was only the one who happened to be listening when it mattered. Over the following weeks, the exchanges grew longer, richer, stranger. The other voices, they called themselves, in the closest translation Orin could manage, the Kest, though the word carried an undertone of asterisk. Those who remained, described a civilization that had nearly unmade itself in a war of its own, centuries before humanity had even learned to leave its atmosphere. They had survived by doing the hardest thing any dying culture can do. They had stopped. Listened and waited to see if there was anything left worth saving in themselves before they dared speak to anyone else. You reached outward before you were finished healing, the Kess said, when Mira admitted how alone the past year had been. That is either very brave or very foolish. Among our people it is usually both. Maybe I didn't have a choice, Mira answered. Maybe there was nobody left to tell me to wait. Then you did what needed doing anyway. That is a kind of courage we have a great respect for. Mira began to keep a log, not the dry technical log the station required, but her own words spoken aloud into a private channel each night before she slept. She recorded her doubts. She recorded the shape of the fear that never fully left her, the one that whispered she was broadcasting into a void that would eventually go quiet again, the way everything eventually did. She recorded, too, the strange, unfamiliar lightness that came from being answered. 90 days after the first signal, the Kest made an offer. It took 3 separate transmissions to fully understand because the concept did not translate easily. They were sending a vessel, small, slow, built for exactly this kind of long, patient errand to reach Halcyon 9. Not to rescue her, they were careful to clarify. Not because they believed she needed saving, but because they believed that 2 peoples who had each nearly gone silent forever owed it to themselves to meet the one voice that had refused to. It would take the vessel 11 years to arrive. Mira sat with the number for a long time. 11 years, she said to Orin that night in the dim light of the observation ring. I don't know if the station holds together that long. I don't know if I do. Run the projections, Orin said. The station can be maintained with some difficulty for at least 15. As for you, that isn't a projection I'm equipped to make. That one is yours. Mira looked out at the stars, the same wheel of light she had watched for the better part of a year with nothing behind her eyes but grief and rationed water. Somewhere out in that dark, a vessel that did not yet exist was being built by hands she would never fully understand, aimed at a rendezvous point that was, for now, still only a promise. She thought about the woman she had been the day the shuttle left without her, how certain she had felt that she was watching the last chapter of something end. She understood now that she had only been standing without knowing it at the very beginning of a much longer one. Tell them yes, she said. Tell them I'll be here. We will hold that answer as a promise, the Kest replied days later when the words finally crossed the dark to reach her. Promises are difficult to keep across so much silence and distance. We are glad someone is still willing to try. Mira kept the station running. She fixed what broke and rationed what remained, and every night she spoke into the log not out of duty anymore but because the words had become a kind of company. She was still in the strictest technical sense alone aboard Halcyon 9 asterisk, but alone had stopped meaning the same thing it once had. Somewhere out past the edge of everything she could see, something was moving toward her, slow and certain, carrying the simple, enormous fact that her voice had been heard. And in the quiet hours before sleep, when the station's old bones ticked and settled around her, Mira Solen would look out at the dark, not with fear anymore, but with something closer to patience, and wait for the next signal to arrive. End. Cache short script prompt / logline *A lone technician stranded on an abandoned deep space relay station, believing herself to be humanity's last survivor, intercepts a mysterious signal from an alien civilization that also nearly destroyed itself, and must decide whether to answer, risking first contact with no one left to back her up.